Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South. I'm Emike Omolu. Welcome. We start in Venezuela, which has requested the governments of Colombia, Peru and the United States to extradite 8 suspects implicated in the assassination attempt of President Nicolas Maduro. The accused face charges of treason, attempted murder, launching an explosive device at a public meeting and terrorism. On August 4th, 2 drones packed with C4 exploded while Maduro was delivering a speech, injuring several military personnel. Meanwhile, El Salvador held a march in solidarity with Venezuela. The Socialism Solidarity Front walked from Simón Bolívar Park in San Salvador to condemn the attack earlier this month.
We are sending a clear message in solidarity with the Venezuelan government, and especially its people, who resisted over the past years the attacks of the U.S. empire. We know that Venezuela is a victim of these attacks for mostly pushing forward a revolutionary process to provide social justice and a better life for the Venezuelan people.
We want to show solidarity with Venezuela and with President Nicolas Maduro, who is being backed by his people. It is important that all of our countries have sovereignty and autonomy. We know the opposition is capable of everything. Venezuela said they took Chavez from us, and we are not going to allow they take Maduro too. They need to respect the democratic processes of Latin America. None of our nations go to the United States to tell them how to govern their people.
Venezuela's new currency, known as the Bolívar Soberano, will come into force on Monday. This new system will take 5 zeros of the currency value, of the current currency value, to make transactions easier. There's also a second official currency, the petro, that will be reinforced. Venezuela's government says it's trying to repair the damage from US-led sanctions. The Minister of Interior, Justice and Peace, Néstor Reverol, met with heads of the country's fiscal system. The talks are happening right before the new currency takes effect. Reverol says the transporting and protection of the new bills will be guaranteed by the government. Brazil has kicked off its election campaign season. Jailed former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is among 13 candidates formally registered. Political parties are now allowed to petition voters ahead of the presidential and congressional ballot. They've mobilized and are on the march to attract voters. Around 100 participants from Lula's leftist Workers' Party campaigned in Sao Paulo.
Brazil wants the left because Brazil is a low-income country, and the only one who did something, who pulled Brazil from the hunger map, was Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Some people want to vote for the Workers' Party. The people want to vote for Lula.
The people who are receiving Ms. Marina support her because of this and to see if we can have a president that isn't corrupt for once. That's all.
This year, I won't vote for any of them. I won't vote for anyone. I just want. These people don't do anything for us. They just promise. And the next thing you see is corruption everywhere.
Meanwhile, there's been a debate on women's issues. 7 candidates discussed how to achieve gender equality, a debate that Lula was barred from attending. Women make up more than half of Brazilian voters, but have poor political representation. They account for just 10% of the Chamber of Deputies.
It's unbelievable that in the 21st century we are still discussing situations like some groups suggesting that women must earn less than men. I think we should bury this past of our history.
We want to have the right to work and have the right to rest our bodies when we grow old. The ones who should lose should be the rich, because we, the poor, can't handle it anymore.
Ecuador has announced Venezuelan immigrants will need their passport to enter the country. This announcement came just after President Lenin Moreno met with a group of 15 Venezuelan immigrants in the presidential palace. Moreno said on Twitter that his government is willing to help, yet this new requirement makes it harder for Venezuelans to enter Ecuador, as previously they only needed their ID to do it. Relatives of Colombians killed in a bus crash in Ecuador last Tuesday are preparing for the funerals. Families hung ribbons outside the victims' houses while they organized a trip to Ecuador's capital, Quito, to identify the bodies. 18 of the 23 victims have already been identified. 19 Colombians died as the bus overturned and crashed into 3 houses after hitting a 4x4.
She said goodbye to my mom, to my aunt. She was really excited because she was going to Peru, but I don't know how they end up in Ecuador. She had never traveled. She never had the opportunity to have the money, and they were going to take her for free.
Meanwhile, the investigation on the tragedy continues. Colombia's prosecutor office has said the initial analysis found cocaine on the bus. Authorities are also investigating why the bus changed routes and possible mechanical problems. We'll be back shortly after a look at this report from our multimedia colleagues. Welcome back. In Colombia, the Revolutionary Alternative Force for the Commons has asked to meet with President Iván Duque. FARC Senator Carlos Antonio Lozada said the party wants to coordinate the full implementation of the peace accord with the government. Meanwhile, the National Liberation Army has delivered proof of life of the 3 policemen and soldier kidnapped over a month ago. Duque has urged their release in order to continue with the peace talks. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis has signed a new agreement with Chile on matters of cybersecurity. Mattis met President Sebastián Piñera at the presidential palace in Santiago during his 3rd stop on his trip around Latin America. Earlier, Mattis visited Brazil and Argentina. The trip will conclude in Colombia.
We want this cherished relationship with the United States not only to be maintained, but we want to strengthen it, extend it to face new challenges and new missions.
Ecuador and Argentina have discussed the need to reactivate the Union of South American Nations, or UNASUR. They also stressed the necessity of strengthening the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC. In a recent interview, Ecuador's Foreign Minister, Jorge Valencia, said the union's crisis was the result of a lack of agreement between the member states. The former Secretary of the Union of South American Nations, or UNASUR, has spoken exclusively to Telesur. Ernesto Samper talked about the regional bloc's future and Colombia's decision to leave it.
I think Colombia's decision responds to a regional scenario. For anyone right now, to think about Latin America and a process of regional decay is to think about suicide. Our region has never been so threatened by aggressive agendas, like the one of US President Donald Trump. To face these agendas by breaking up every mechanism of integration we have, like UNASUR, Mercosur, CELAC, and ALBA, is to have a suicidal approach.
Indigenous leaders from across South America have finalized a plan to create a 150 million hectare protected area across the Amazon basin. The meetings brought together ideas from their colleagues in Ecuador, Peru, Suriname, Guyana, and French Guiana. The leaders hope to emerge from the four-day conference with a plan to be presented at the United Nations Biodiversity Conference in November. They will call on world leaders to support their initiative to protect one of the world's greatest national treasures from exploitation.
I want to stress that we, indigenous peoples, are not against the dignified, clean development of humanity. We are against the irresponsible sucking of natural resources that is damaging not only the people who are living there, but are damaging the environment. And this environment contributes to the global health of all peoples.
Social organizations, peace activists, and different churches have met in the midst of concerning situation in Colombia caused by systematic murders against social leaders. And moving on to Honduras, an Honduran couple has denounced their child is suffering from health problems after being held at a U.S. detention center. 16-month-old Johan suffered from sleep problems since he was returned from the United States while being detained. The child grew his first teeth, took his first steps, and spoke his first word, agua or water. Johan was separated from his father under President Donald Trump's zero-tolerance policy on immigration last March after crossing the border into Texas.
He gets nightmares at night. He gets up and sleepwalks at night. He wakes up crying and he cannot sleep with the light off. We have to sleep with the light on because he's afraid to sleep with the light off.
Haiti's new Prime Minister Jean-Henri Séant is waiting for Parliament to approve his nomination. Séant delivered his documents to Parliament 7 days ago, but the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies haven't made their decision yet. A presidential candidate in 2010 and 2016, the former Prime Minister announced his resignation on July 14th after demonstrations took to the streets of the capital Port-au-Prince over announced fuel hike prices. In Panama, a national community movement is demanding better housing. Members of informal settlements from several parts of the country marched against forceful evictions. They called for more dignified housing. 500 informal settlements were created due to the lack of access to housing in the country.
Today we are making a call to the government so that families like Rio Tapia have dignified housing, since these people have needs. They were brutally evicted the last year in Cerro Galera or Vista al Mar and other communities. We are claiming a dignified housing because it is the right of all Panamanians. In this country, the beaches have been stolen, along with the land of the indigenous and campesinos. This is why we are calling on government representatives to think and look for a solution.
In Argentina, industry is suffering in the wake of recommendations by the International Monetary Fund.
The industrial sector has recorded a year-on-year decrease reaching 8.1%. That's according to the latest data published by the National Institute of Statistics and Census. This is the worst collapse in the industrial sector since 2002, affecting the job market.
Hemos perdido más de 100.000 puestos de trabajo en sectores de alto salario.
We've lost more than 100 high-salary jobs. Activities in the industrial sector reduced enough 20%. Operations have systematically been suspended for several days this year, and then we see companies close. The increase of imported goods has worsened this crisis.
The cut on revenues due to inflation, the strong fiscal adjustment recommended by the International Monetary Fund, and the rise of tariffs have impacted the domestic market with sales that have drastically reduced.
We must stop these policies to the line of regional integration in order to work with Brazil and with other brother countries in the region. We have to limit imports and create an investment bank that allows the development of small and medium-sized companies. We also have to strengthen some strategic areas of the big industry to push for a better quality employment.
Economists say there is no easy solution to the crisis.
We need to tackle structural problems and also turning around several of the policies that we have now. We need the economy to grow, but to grow oriented towards the domestic market. Workers need to have purchasing power. We also need a profound policy that promotes the growth of the industrial sector.
Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund has audited the country's accounts and demanded that the government implement the adjustment policies, which will have a negative impact on the domestic market and local production.
A 6-year-old has become the first child in Ecuador to have the names of both same-sex parents on her national identity documents. The child is the daughter of same-sex couple Nicolas Maduro and Helen Bicknell, 2 British women who live in Ecuador. The civil registry refused to register the birth in 2012 with both surnames, sparking a legal battle, which ended with the country's constitutional court ruling in the mother's favour in June of 2018.
From the beginning, we were sure we would achieve this and that it was the best thing for Satya. We were confident that they would arrive, but we didn't know if it would be the next day, in 2018 or in 2028. But fortunately, it is today. We always knew that, and we were confident it was better to wait and for them to have everything that having 2 mothers entails, instead of 1.
The exhibition Queer Museu is reopening in Brazil after closing over a year ago. The art show closed after ultra-conservative groups said it advocated for paedophilia, zoophilia and blasphemy. The artist called it censorship and said the exhibition would never show in a traditional museum. In Peru, thousands of patients hope the regulation of the law that decriminalizes the use of marijuana for medical purposes benefits health and life of Peruvians and not just the pharmaceutical companies.
Margarita has been using cannabis oil to treat her fibromyalgia, tendinitis and diabetic polyneuropathy that she has suffered with for the last 8 months. Her life changed favorably, leaving behind this pile of medicine that don't make her feel any better.
La entrevista me la tendrían que estar haciendo en cama.
This interview I would have do it in bed and completely sedated. I would practically not be clear-headed for the amount of medication prescribed by the rheumatologist and the psychiatrists.
Que me indica el reumatólogo y el psiquiatra.
And although she can live her life normally, her treatment has some legal restrictions. Even though Peru decriminalized the medicinal use of marijuana, the preliminary regulation of that law states that she can only have access to the drugs with a THC concentration that does not exceed 0.5%, but the one she uses has 30%.
Yo, Margarita Calero, debería estar presa.
Me, Margarita Calero, should in jail for consuming and having in my purse cannabis. If they find this concentration, I could be charged.
Con esa concentración, pues ya tengo que estar siendo procesada.
According to the patients who use cannabis, this law has other limitations, such as the medical prescriptions are only valid for 3 days and the doctors who can write prescriptions are restricted. But above all, that the drugs derived from marijuana are considered in the list of controlled products.
En la 2A ya está demostrado que el acceso sería del menos del 0.4%.
In Peru, it's already proven that access would be less than 0.4% and prices would be very high, and we are practically conditioned to import medicine that costs $500, which is now costing us $1,200.
Getting these chances in the regulation of the use of medical marijuana would not be enough. Patient organizations say they will continue to fight to create a new law that allows for the self-cultivation and production of medicine through partnerships.
A 3,000-year-old pre-Hispanic mural has been unearthed in northern Peru. The ancient mural belongs to the lost Caral civilization. The discovery was made in Vichama archaeological site and reveals figures that depict members of the civilization, as well as snakes, a symbol of fertility for the land. The Caral is believed to be the oldest civilization in the Americas. It developed from 3000 until 1600 BC, when it was mysteriously toppled. Meanwhile, Mexican culture is being showcased at Brussels' world-famous flower carpet. It's 1,800 square meters and is made of 500,000 blossoms on the central square of Belgium's capital, paying tribute to the Mexican region of Guanajuato. The design, created by Mexican artist Ru, is surrounded by illustrations of the country's fauna and flora and different Aztec symbols. The flower carpet that attracts thousands of visitors will remain at Brussels' Grand Place until Sunday. More news from us after this short break to have a look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. A brigade of Cuban aid workers in Kenya has been working to provide medical care for families as well as specialist work in public hospitals. For the past month, doctors have been performing complex procedures like treating burn victims, reconstructive surgery for those most in need, and delivering essential care for newborns.
Resources are minimal and patients have very little when it comes to medicine or even care. A sick newborn needs specific resources that are simply not available here. But we continue to work with what we have. Maybe in the future we will be able to reduce the mortality rate from 55% to 25%.
Now let's take a look at some of the other stories from around the world.
Supporters of Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, have marked the 6-year anniversary of his stay in the Ecuadorian embassy in London since being granted asylum. However, his stay could be coming to an end as Ecuador and the UK have been discussing his removal. US Senator Rand Paul has argued that Assange should be immune from prosecution on the condition that he travels to the US to testify about the publication of classified documents. Some people have rejected the attendance of Spain's King Felipe to a tribute in Barcelona for the victims of an Islamist attack. A banner was hoisted out of Plaza Catalunya stating the king was not welcome due to the treatment of protesters over the independence of Catalonia. Barcelona commemorated those that died when a van ploughed into crowds last year. Helicopters are being deployed to airlift people out of the floods in the Indian state of Kerala. Torrential rains during the monsoon season have killed 164 people and displaced more than 200,000. More adversity is expected as water levels are on the rise in the worst floods in a century. The government is pressing the military to step up their efforts to rescue people.
The Vatican has condemned Catholic priests in Pennsylvania, the US, accused of abusing more than 1,000 people over the last 70 years. A spokesman said they were in a state of shame and sorrow over the revelations.
The Holy Father understands how much these crimes can shake the faith and the spirit of believers. Survivors and victims should know that the Pope is on their side. He wants the Church to listen to them so that we can root out this tragic horror which has destroyed the lives of so many innocent people.
And don't forget to tune in on Sunday, August 19th. Palestinian teen activist Ahed Tamimi sits down exclusively with Telesur correspondent Sergio Rodrigo. Hear the thoughts and aspirations from this heroic symbol of resistance. Telesur goes one-on-one with the 17-year-old protest icon at her home in Palestine following her release from prison. Tune in Sunday at 7 p.m. Quito time or 8 p.m. Caracas time. And we've come to the end of this news brief. These and many other stories, find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. We're also on social media. Check out Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. I'm Emiko Molu and thank you again for watching.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of